If you are alone right now, stop assuming that something has gone wrong. Stop believing that your solitude is proof that you are failing, unloved, or forgotten. That is how the average person interprets isolation, because the average person has been conditioned to fear standing without a crowd. From childhood, people are taught that popularity is success, constant social interaction is happiness, and being surrounded by others is a sign that you are valuable. Machiavelli would challenge that belief immediately. He understood that the crowd rarely strengthens a person's judgment. More often, it weakens it. The crowd rewards conformity, punishes independent thought, and quietly reshapes your identity until you no longer know whether your decisions belong to you or to the people influencing you. That is why if you find yourself walking alone, you may not be losing your place in the world. You may finally be escaping the influence that has kept you ordinary. Look closely at how most people make decisions. Very few stop to ask themselves what they truly believe. Instead, they ask a different question: what will everyone else think? That single question controls careers, relationships, opinions, and even personal dreams. People remain in jobs they hate because everyone expects stability. They stay in unhealthy friendships because they fear appearing lonely. They silence their ambitions because the people around them call those ambitions unrealistic. Little by little, they stop living according to reason and begin living according to approval. The tragedy is that this process happens so gradually that most never notice it. They mistake social acceptance for wisdom. Machiavelli understood that a person whose thinking depends on the crowd can never become truly powerful, because the crowd will always control the direction of that person's life. This is why solitude becomes such an unexpected advantage. The moment you step away from constant opinions, something remarkable begins to happen. Your thoughts become quieter, but they also become clearer. For the first time in years, you begin hearing your own mind instead of the endless voices competing for your attention. You start questioning beliefs you accepted without examination. You begin asking whether your goals are genuinely yours or simply borrowed from people around you. This is the work that cannot happen in constant noise. Clarity requires distance. Every strategist in history understood that important decisions are rarely made in crowded rooms. They are made in moments of reflection, where emotion fades and judgment becomes sharper. There is another reason being alone is often the right path. Solitude protects you from emotional contagion. Human beings constantly absorb the attitudes, fears, and limitations of the people surrounding them. Spend enough time with individuals who complain about life, and your optimism begins fading. Surround yourself with people who fear risk, and your own courage quietly weakens. Stay close to those who constantly seek approval, and soon you begin measuring your worth through their opinions. This influence is rarely obvious because it happens one conversation at a time. Machiavelli recognized that power requires protecting your mind before protecting anything else. If your thinking belongs to everyone around you, your future will eventually belong to them as well. Notice how uncomfortable most people become when they are left alone with their thoughts. They immediately reach for distractions. They search for conversations, entertainment, or constant stimulation because silence forces them to confront questions they have been avoiding. But the individual who embraces solitude develops a psychological advantage that few ever experience. Instead of running from silence, they begin using it. They analyze their mistakes honestly. They identify emotional weaknesses before others can exploit them. They strengthen discipline while everyone else seeks comfort. Every hour spent understanding yourself is an hour invested in becoming harder to manipulate. The crowd may offer companionship, but solitude offers self-mastery. Machiavelli also understood that dependence is one of the greatest enemies of freedom. The more desperately you need people around you, the easier you become to control. Someone who fears being abandoned will tolerate disrespect. Someone who cannot bear loneliness will remain loyal to those who do not deserve loyalty. Someone who constantly seeks approval will sacrifice principles simply to avoid rejection. Solitude breaks this dependence. It teaches you that peace does not come from being surrounded by people. It comes from being comfortable with yourself. Once you discover that you can stand alone without losing your confidence, something powerful changes inside you. The opinions of others lose much of their influence because they are no longer necessary for your emotional stability. Ironically, this is also the moment your presence becomes more valuable. People naturally respect those who do not desperately seek attention. They sense the difference between someone who chooses relationships and someone who clings to them out of fear. Quiet independence creates a kind of confidence that cannot be performed because it comes from within. You stop chasing invitations. You stop forcing conversations. You stop compromising your values simply to belong. Instead, you allow your character to determine who enters your life. That quiet shift transforms loneliness into strength because your decisions are no longer driven by the fear of standing alone. This does not mean rejecting all relationships or isolating yourself from the world. Machiavelli never argued that allies were unnecessary. He argued that dependence was dangerous. There is a profound difference. Strong alliances should be chosen from wisdom, not desperation. The person who has learned to stand alone chooses companions carefully because they no longer need anyone to complete them. They seek loyalty instead of popularity, character instead of convenience, and substance instead of numbers. Their solitude becomes a filter that removes superficial influences and leaves space only for relationships that genuinely strengthen their purpose. So if you are alone today, resist the temptation to believe that life is moving against you. Perhaps life is removing distractions before revealing your direction. Perhaps the silence you fear is preparing the clarity you have been searching for. While others remain trapped by the expectations of the crowd, you are being given the rare opportunity to discover who you are without anyone else's permission. History repeatedly shows that those who eventually lead the world first learned how to think without it. Because the moment you stop fearing solitude, you stop giving the crowd the power to decide who you become. Once you become comfortable walking alone, you begin noticing something that most people never see. The crowd does not simply surround you, it slowly shapes you. Every group has invisible rules about how to think, how to behave, what to admire, and what to fear. Most people follow these rules without realizing it because the desire to belong is one of the strongest forces in human nature. Machiavelli understood this long before modern psychology gave it a name. He knew that the greatest danger was not physical isolation but intellectual captivity. A person who cannot think independently will always live according to someone else's agenda. That is why being alone is often the right thing. Solitude is where independent thinking is born, and independent thinking is the foundation of every powerful life. Look carefully at how people behave in groups. A single individual may be intelligent, thoughtful, and rational, but place that same person inside a crowd, and something changes. They begin adjusting their opinions to match everyone else. They stay silent when they disagree because they fear rejection. They support ideas they privately question simply to avoid standing apart. This happens in workplaces, friendships, families, and even entire societies. The crowd rewards agreement because agreement creates comfort, but comfort rarely creates greatness. History has never been changed by people who waited for permission to think differently. Every meaningful breakthrough began with someone who was willing to stand apart from the majority and trust their own judgment. This is exactly why solitude becomes such a powerful advantage. When you remove yourself from constant social influence, your mind begins to recover its independence. For the first time, you are no longer forced to compare your progress with everyone else's. You stop measuring your success by public approval and begin measuring it by personal growth. Questions start replacing assumptions. Instead of asking, what does everyone believe? You begin asking, what is actually true? That single shift changes the way you see the world. You no longer inherit opinions, you examine them. You no longer follow traditions simply because they are popular. You evaluate whether they deserve to be followed. This is how powerful minds are formed. Machiavelli believed that the person who depends on the crowd for certainty will always remain vulnerable. Why? Because crowds are emotional. They celebrate today what they condemn tomorrow. They admire one person until someone more popular appears. Their judgments are often driven by fear, excitement, or convenience rather than reason. If your thinking constantly follows public opinion, your direction will constantly change. You will never develop the consistency required to build influence because your identity will always depend on external approval. Solitude protects you from this instability. It gives you enough distance to observe public opinion without becoming controlled by it. Consider how many dreams quietly disappear because of social pressure. Someone wants to start a business but abandons the idea because friends call it unrealistic. Another person wants to change careers but remains trapped because family members expect security. Someone has a unique perspective but never shares it because they fear criticism. In every case, the greatest obstacle is not lack of ability. It is the invisible pressure of other people's expectations. The crowd rarely intends to destroy your potential. It simply encourages you to stay within the limits that feel familiar to them. Machiavelli understood that extraordinary results require the courage to disappoint ordinary expectations. That courage grows only when you become comfortable standing apart. There is another reason solitude strengthens independent thinking. It teaches you to solve problems without relying on constant reassurance. Most people immediately seek advice whenever they face uncertainty. They ask friends, relatives, coworkers, or strangers what they should do. While seeking wisdom has value, constantly needing approval weakens your judgment. You begin trusting other people's conclusions more than your own observations. Eventually, you lose confidence in your ability to think clearly without external guidance. Solitude reverses this habit. It forces you to sit with difficult questions, analyze situations carefully, and reach conclusions through reflection instead of emotional reaction. Every time you solve a problem through your own reasoning, your confidence grows stronger. This does not mean believing you are always right or rejecting every opinion you hear. Independent thinking is not arrogance. It is the discipline of examining ideas before accepting them. Strong individuals listen carefully, but they never surrender responsibility for their own judgment. They gather information from many sources, reflect on it privately, and make decisions according to reason rather than popularity. That is the difference between a mind that belongs to itself and a mind that belongs to the crowd. Ironically, many people fear solitude because they mistake it for loneliness. They believe that walking alone means losing connection with others. In reality, temporary solitude often protects you from permanent regret. It gives you the space to discover your own values before the world assigns values to you. It allows you to build convictions strong enough to survive criticism. When your thinking becomes independent, you stop changing direction every time public opinion shifts. You become steady, focused, and increasingly difficult to manipulate because your beliefs are built through reflection rather than imitation. As this transformation takes place, something remarkable happens. You no longer feel the need to win every argument because your confidence no longer depends on convincing everyone else. You become calmer because you trust your ability to think clearly. You become more selective about whose opinions deserve your attention. Most importantly, you stop fearing the discomfort of standing alone because you understand that the greatest discoveries about the world and about yourself are almost always made away from the noise of the crowd. Because the moment you learn to think without the crowd's permission, being alone stops feeling like isolation and starts becoming your greatest source of strength. There comes a moment in every person's life when they face a choice that determines the direction of their future. They can continue chasing people, constantly seeking acceptance, attention, and companionship, or they can stop running after others and begin building a life so strong that respect comes naturally. Machiavelli understood that nothing weakens a person faster than the desperate need to be wanted. The individual who cannot tolerate being alone becomes predictable, and predictable people are easily controlled. They remain in relationships that no longer serve them, tolerate disrespect they should reject, and exhaust themselves trying to keep people close who have already decided to leave. But the moment you stop chasing, something unexpected happens. You no longer appear desperate, you appear complete. And there is nothing more attractive than a person who has learned to stand confidently without depending on anyone else's approval. Look closely at human nature. People rarely value what constantly follows them. They value what possesses the confidence to move forward without needing permission. This is why chasing often creates the opposite result of what you desire. The more desperately you pursue attention, the more your value appears to decrease. Every unnecessary message, every attempt to force a conversation, every effort to remain constantly available quietly communicates the same message. I need you more than you need me. Even if those words are never spoken, people instinctively feel them. Machiavelli recognized that dependence destroys influence because the person who needs something most always negotiates from a position of weakness. If you are always afraid of losing people, your decisions will always be controlled by that fear. Being alone protects you from falling into this trap. Solitude teaches you that your peace does not disappear simply because someone walks away. It teaches you that your worth is not measured by how many people answer your calls or respond to your messages. The more comfortable you become with your own company, the less urgency you feel to convince others to stay. This changes your entire energy. You stop forcing connections that were never meant to last. Instead of asking, how do I make people choose me? You begin asking a much stronger question: who has truly earned a place in my life? That single shift transforms your relationships because they are no longer built on fear of abandonment, but on mutual respect. Most people believe attraction comes from giving more, explaining more, and trying harder. Yet history repeatedly shows the opposite. The individuals who quietly command the most respect are usually those who never appear desperate for attention. They listen more than they speak. They observe before they trust. They allow others to reveal their intentions instead of rushing to prove their own value. This is not manipulation. It is emotional discipline. They understand that relationships built through desperation rarely survive because they were created to escape loneliness rather than to share purpose. When you are comfortable being alone, you stop accepting anyone simply because they happen to be available. There is another psychological reason why solitude makes you more respected. It removes emotional dependence from your decisions. Imagine two people entering the same relationship. One fears being left alone, while the other already knows they can live peacefully by themselves. Which one is more likely to tolerate dishonesty? Which one is more likely to ignore red flags? Which one is more likely to sacrifice their principles just to keep the relationship alive? The answer is obvious. The person who fears loneliness becomes willing to compromise almost anything. The person who has already mastered solitude can evaluate situations calmly because they know walking away is always an option. That quiet freedom creates an inner confidence that others immediately notice. Machiavelli understood that people are naturally drawn towards strength, and one of the clearest signs of strength is emotional independence. When you stop chasing, you stop trying to convince people of your worth. Your actions begin speaking louder than your words. You no longer feel the need to constantly remind others what you have done for them or why they should appreciate you. If someone chooses not to recognize your value, you allow them to leave without sacrificing your dignity. This ability is incredibly rare because most people would rather lose themselves than lose someone's attention. But the individual who accepts solitude discovers a freedom that cannot be purchased. They realize that peace is more valuable than forced companionship. Ironically, this is often the point where people begin noticing you. Not because you are playing games or pretending to be unavailable, but because your confidence is no longer dependent on external validation. You become calmer in conversations because you are not trying to impress anyone. You become more selective with your time because you understand its value. You become a better listener because you no longer feel the need to fill every silence. Others begin sensing that your attention is intentional rather than automatic. That naturally increases your value because people respect what is freely given but never desperately offered. This does not mean you should reject meaningful relationships or isolate yourself from the world. Machiavelli never suggested that allies were unnecessary. Strong alliances are essential, but they should be formed through wisdom rather than desperation. There is a profound difference between choosing companionship and needing companionship. One comes from strength, the other from fear. When you have learned to stand alone, you enter every relationship with freedom instead of dependence. You stay because the connection is meaningful, not because loneliness terrifies you. That changes the entire foundation of every friendship, partnership, and alliance you build. Over time, something remarkable happens. The energy you once spent chasing people is redirected toward improving yourself. You develop knowledge instead of seeking approval. You build discipline instead of pursuing attention. You create purpose instead of constantly worrying about who stayed and who left. As your character grows stronger, the right people naturally begin entering your life, not because you hunted them down, but because genuine strength has a quiet way of attracting those who recognize it. Because the moment you stop chasing people out of fear of being alone, you become someone whose quiet confidence earns the respect that desperation never could. One of the greatest gifts of solitude is that it reveals the truth about the people around you. As long as you are constantly available, always initiating conversations, always checking in, always making sacrifices, and always keeping every relationship alive through your own effort, it becomes almost impossible to know who genuinely values you. Everyone appears loyal when you are doing all the work. Everyone seems present when you are the one carrying the relationship forward. But the moment you step back and embrace being alone, something begins to happen. The silence creates clarity. People start revealing themselves without realizing it. Machiavelli understood that human nature is exposed most clearly when you stop feeding it what it has come to expect. That is why periods of solitude are not signs of loss. They are opportunities to separate appearance from reality. Think about how many relationships exist only because one person refuses to let them end. One person always sends the first message. One person always apologizes first, even when they were not wrong. One person always arranges the meetings, offers the help, and keeps the connection alive. The relationship appears balanced from the outside, but beneath the surface it survives because one individual is afraid of being alone. The moment that effort stops, the relationship quietly fades. At first, this feels painful. You wonder why people no longer reach out. You begin questioning your own value. But Machiavelli would tell you to resist that conclusion. Their silence is not always a judgment of your worth. More often, it is a revelation of their priorities. Solitude does not destroy genuine relationships. It exposes the ones that depended entirely on your constant effort. This is why being alone can be one of the wisest decisions you ever make. Distance removes illusion. When you stop chasing people, you gain the ability to observe instead of react. You begin noticing who remembers you without being reminded. You discover who respects your absence instead of demanding your presence. You see who supports you when there is nothing to gain and who only appears when they need your time, your advice, or your resources. These lessons cannot be learned while you are constantly filling every silence with your own effort. They can only be discovered when you allow space for people to reveal their true intentions. Human nature follows a simple pattern. People often become comfortable with whatever is always available. If you are constantly present, many will eventually treat your presence as something ordinary. They assume you will always answer, always forgive, always understand, and always remain there regardless of how little they contribute. This is not necessarily because they are evil. It is because familiarity often replaces appreciation. Machiavelli understood that unlimited availability weakens your position because people stop recognizing the value of what never seems scarce. Solitude interrupts that pattern. The moment you step back, people are forced to experience your absence. Some will suddenly realize your value. Others will not notice at all. Both reactions give you valuable information. There is another reason solitude reveals the truth. It removes emotional desperation from your judgment. When you fear loneliness, you overlook warning signs because losing people feels more frightening than being mistreated. You ignore broken promises. You excuse repeated disrespect. You accept one-sided loyalty because having imperfect relationships seems better than having none at all. But once you become comfortable standing alone, your standards naturally rise. You stop asking whether someone likes you and begin asking whether they deserve your trust. That single shift changes everything. Instead of collecting as many people as possible, you begin protecting your life from the wrong people. Quality replaces quantity, and your relationships become stronger because they are built on mutual respect rather than emotional dependence. Machiavelli believed that wise individuals observe before they commit. They understand that words are easy, but patterns reveal character. Anyone can promise loyalty during comfortable times. Anyone can appear supportive when everything is going well. But time, distance, and silence expose what conversation often hides. The person who values you will not disappear simply because you stop making every effort. They will notice your absence. They will reach out. They will contribute to the relationship because genuine respect naturally seeks balance. Those who vanish the moment your effort disappears were often connected more to your usefulness than to your character. This realization can be painful, but it is also deeply liberating. Every relationship that quietly fades during your season of solitude creates room for something healthier. Instead of wasting years investing in people who only remained because you carried the entire connection, you become available for relationships built on reciprocity. You no longer need to convince anyone to stay because you understand that loyalty cannot be forced. The right people never require endless pursuit. They choose to remain because they value who you are, not because of what you constantly provide. As you continue walking this path, something remarkable changes inside you. You stop measuring your life by the number of people around you. You begin measuring it by the depth of the trust you share with the few who have proven themselves over time. The silence that once frightened you becomes a source of wisdom. Instead of seeing loneliness, you see clarity. Instead of fearing fewer relationships, you appreciate stronger ones. Most importantly, you stop interpreting every departure as a personal failure. You understand that some people leave because they were never meant to walk the same path as you. Their absence is not always a loss. Sometimes it is protection. In the end, solitude is not about separating yourself from the world. It is about creating enough distance to see people as they truly are, rather than as you desperately hope they will be. That clarity is one of the greatest forms of power because it protects your time, your energy, and your future from those who were never committed to your journey in the first place. Because the moment solitude reveals who truly belongs in your life, being alone no longer feels like emptiness. It becomes the beginning of genuine freedom. There is a reason the strongest individuals in history never feared periods of loneliness. They understood something that most people spend their entire lives trying to avoid. Solitude is not an empty space waiting to be filled. It is a workshop where powerful people quietly build the version of themselves that the world will one day admire. While others see isolation as punishment, strategic minds see it as preparation. Machiavelli believed that real power is never created in moments of comfort. It is forged when no one is watching, no one is applauding, and no one is offering reassurance. If you are alone today, you may be standing in the very place where your greatest transformation begins. Look around at the people who constantly surround themselves with noise. The moment they wake up, they reach for their phones. They fill every silent moment with conversations, entertainment, or endless distractions because they cannot tolerate being alone with their own thoughts. They believe they are escaping loneliness, but they are also escaping self-discovery. Every distraction steals another opportunity to understand themselves. Every hour spent chasing temporary stimulation is an hour not invested in becoming stronger. Machiavelli would argue that this is exactly how ordinary lives are created. People become experts at escaping silence instead of using it. The individual who embraces solitude follows a completely different path. Instead of asking, "How do I avoid feeling alone?" they ask, "How can I become stronger while I am alone?" That single question changes everything. Suddenly, loneliness is no longer an obstacle. It becomes an opportunity. Every quiet evening becomes a chance to read, think, reflect, and develop skills that most people never have the discipline to acquire. Every setback becomes a lesson instead of a reason for self-pity. Every disappointment becomes fuel for growth instead of an excuse to quit. This is why being alone is often the right thing. It removes the distractions that prevent deep transformation from taking place. Machiavelli understood that knowledge creates influence, but knowledge requires uninterrupted attention. A distracted mind rarely becomes a dangerous mind. The people who eventually outthink everyone around them are usually the ones willing to spend long periods studying while others are chasing entertainment. They understand that wisdom is accumulated quietly. It is not built through constant social approval, but through consistent observation and reflection. Solitude creates the environment where this process can happen. Without the endless pressure to impress others, your energy is redirected toward improving yourself instead of protecting your image. There is another advantage hidden inside loneliness. It strengthens emotional endurance. Most people panic the moment life becomes uncomfortable. They immediately search for someone to rescue them from their emotions. They seek reassurance, sympathy, or constant validation because they have never learned how to process discomfort alone. As a result, they become emotionally dependent. Their peace depends on other people's presence, opinions, and encouragement. Machiavelli recognized this as a dangerous weakness. Anyone who controls your emotional stability eventually controls your decisions. But the person who has learned to survive difficult seasons alone cannot be manipulated so easily. They know that pain passes, uncertainty fades, and confidence grows stronger every time they overcome hardship without relying on external validation. Think about every meaningful ability you admire in powerful people. Discipline is developed alone. Mastery is developed alone. Strategic thinking is developed alone. Emotional control is developed a peer because someone constantly entertained you or praised your efforts. They are created during long periods when progress feels invisible. This is why so many people quit too early. They mistake temporary loneliness for permanent failure. They cannot see that the silence they dislike is actually shaping qualities that noisy environments never could. While the crowd searches for immediate comfort, the future leader is quietly building lasting strength. This is also why solitude often feels uncomfortable at first. It forces you to face every weakness you normally hide behind constant activity. There are no distractions to protect your ego, no applause to convince you that you are improving, no audience to validate your identity. You are left alone with your habits, your fears, your excuses, and your ambitions. Many people run away from this experience because it demands complete honesty. But those who remain discover something extraordinary. Every weakness they confront becomes something they can improve. Every fear they understand becomes something they can overcome. Every quiet moment becomes another step toward emotional independence. Machiavelli knew that the greatest victories are won long before the battle begins. They are won during preparation. The person who spends years strengthening their mind while others seek comfort enters every challenge with an invisible advantage. Their confidence is not based on hope. It is built upon countless hours of unseen work. When opportunities finally appear, people call them lucky. They never realize that what looks like luck is simply preparation meeting the right moment. Solitude made that preparation possible because it removed the distractions that consumes everyone else. Eventually, something remarkable happens. You stop seeing yourself as someone who is alone. Instead, you begin seeing yourself as someone who is becoming. Every quiet day gains purpose. Every difficult season gains meaning. You no longer measure your life by how many people surround you, but by how much stronger you become with each passing month. While others desperately seek company to escape themselves, you learn to value the relationship you build with your own mind. That relationship becomes the foundation of every future success because it cannot be taken away by rejection, betrayal, or changing circumstances. The irony is that many of the people who once pitied your solitude will later admire the discipline, wisdom, and confidence that were created because of it. They will see the results without ever understanding the process. They will notice your strength without realizing it was built during the seasons when nobody believed anything important was happening. But you will know the truth. The loneliness they feared became the training ground that transformed your character, sharpened your judgment, and prepared you for responsibilities that weaker minds could never carry. Because the moment you stop treating loneliness as a punishment and start using it as preparation, being alone becomes the greatest investment you will ever make in your future. After you have learned to think independently, Stop chasing people, discovered who truly belongs in your life, and transform solitude into a source of strength. One final truth begins to reveal itself. The people who leave the greatest mark on history rarely begin their journey surrounded by applause. More often, they begin in silence. They are misunderstood before they are respected, ignored before they are admired, and doubted before they are recognized. Machiavelli understood that this is not an unfortunate accident. It is part of the natural path of power. When your vision is larger than the expectations of the people around you, solitude is often the price you pay before your purpose becomes visible. If you are walking alone today, it may not be because you are moving in the wrong direction. It may be because you are traveling a road that very few people have the courage to follow. Most people build their lives around immediate acceptance. They hesitate to make difficult decisions because they fear criticism more than regret. They abandon meaningful goals because the people closest to them cannot understand what they are trying to build. They shrink their ambitions until those ambitions become comfortable enough for everyone else to approve of them. In doing so, they gain temporary acceptance, but lose the opportunity to become extraordinary. Machiavelli believed that anyone seeking lasting influence must become comfortable with misunderstanding. The crowd often rejects what it cannot yet comprehend. That rejection does not necessarily mean you are wrong. Sometimes it simply means you have seen something before everyone else has. This is why purpose and popularity rarely grow together in the beginning. A person committed to a meaningful mission cannot spend every day seeking approval because purpose demands sacrifices that popularity never requires. There will be evenings when you choose learning instead of entertainment. There will be mornings when you continue working while others continue sleeping. There will be seasons when your progress is invisible, your efforts are unnoticed, and your confidence is tested by silence rather than applause. To the outside world, it may appear that nothing is happening. But beneath the surface, your character is becoming stronger, your discipline is becoming deeper, and your vision is becoming clearer. Solitude is not delaying your purpose. It is preparing you to carry it. One of the greatest mistakes people make is believing they need many allies before they begin moving toward their goals. Machiavelli would argue the opposite. He knew that if your purpose depends entirely on constant encouragement, it will collapse the moment encouragement disappears. Real conviction is revealed when you continue moving forward without applause. It is easy to remain committed when everyone believes in you. It is much harder to remain committed when nobody understands your direction. That is why solitude becomes a test. It asks a simple but uncomfortable question. Will you remain faithful to your purpose even when you must walk alone? The answer to that question determines whether your ambition is genuine or merely dependent on recognition. As you continue this journey, something remarkable begins to happen. You stop viewing solitude as evidence that something is missing. Instead, you begin seeing it as proof that you are becoming someone capable of carrying greater responsibility. You realize that every hour spent developing your mind, strengthening your discipline, and refining your character has been quietly separating you from habits that keep most people trapped. You no longer envy those who constantly seek attention because you understand that attention and influence are not the same. Attention is borrowed from the crowd. Influence is earned through character. One disappears quickly. The other grows stronger with time. Eventually, the right people begin entering your life, but they arrive differently from those you chased in the past. They are not attracted by your desperation because desperation no longer exists. They are drawn toward your stability, your clarity, and your purpose. These relationships feel different because they are built on mutual respect rather than emotional need. You are no longer searching for people to complete you. Instead, you are meeting individuals who strengthen a life that was already complete. This is one of the hidden rewards of embracing solitude. It teaches you that meaningful alliances are discovered through patience, not pursuit. Quality replaces quantity, and every relationship becomes more valuable because it is chosen with wisdom instead of fear. Machiavelli understood that power does not belong to the person surrounded by the largest crowd. It belongs to the individual who remains steady whether the crowd is present or absent. The person who depends on applause becomes anxious when applause disappears. The person who depends on purpose continues moving regardless of who is watching. That kind of independence creates a confidence that cannot be manufactured because it comes from experience. You have already survived seasons of silence. You've already overcome loneliness. You've already learned how to rely on your own judgment. Once those lessons become part of your character, the opinions of others lose much of their power over your decisions. This does not mean you should reject companionship or believe that success is meant to be experienced alone forever. Even Machiavelli understood the importance of trustworthy allies. But he also knew that the strongest alliances are formed after you have first become capable of standing on your own. A person who cannot stand alone will often choose companions out of fear. A person who has mastered solitude chooses allies out of wisdom. That difference determines the quality of every relationship, every partnership, and every opportunity that follows. As your purpose becomes stronger than your desire for acceptance, loneliness gradually loses its ability to frighten you. You no longer count how many people walk beside you because you are focused on where you are going. Every step taken in solitude becomes another investment in the future you are creating. Every sacrifice becomes another reminder that extraordinary destinations rarely have crowded roads. The path may be quiet, but it is also clear. While others continue seeking permission from the crowd, you continue moving toward a purpose that no longer depends on anyone else's approval. One day, the same people who questioned why you walked alone may wonder how you became so confident, disciplined, and respected. They will admire the results without fully understanding the years of solitude that produced them. But you will know that your greatest strength was never created by avoiding loneliness. It was created by embracing it until it transformed into wisdom, resilience, and unwavering purpose. Because the moment your purpose becomes greater than your fear of walking alone, solitude stops being your burden and becomes the path that leads you to lasting strength and influence.